This is Gibraltar Today. We'll start with our top story. A 63-year-old paedophile was found guilty of 19 counts of sexual abuse and has been sentenced to 39 years in prison. Graham Southwell is a former GHA and St John Ambulance volunteer. He abused 5 children repeatedly over a period of 25 years. The case has been followed very closely by our reporters Melanie, Chipolina, Guilliano and Iain, Triay, Clarence, who were both in the Supreme Court yesterday. Bring us into the picture. Melanie, the victims were there. What was it like?
Oh, it was very hard to watch, to be honest, having followed the case from the start. Yesterday, for me, it was probably the hardest day to just see them sitting there, just waiting to hear what sentence Southwell was going to receive. But you could hear the sighs of relief, the crying when 39 years was what was handed down to him.
Anthony Dudley decided. No?
We spoke to them afterwards, and they were actually quite shocked at how long a sentence he was given. I think they thought it was going to be much shorter.
They were prepared for a much shorter sentence. They seem to be pleased. Happy is not the word. They're pleased that some justice seems to have been done. I will bring you up on one point. Southwell's been found guilty of abusing 5 victims. The strong suggestion is that these were not the only victims, but it speaks to the difficulty of coming forward and going through what they've been through and the bravery. Genuinely, I've been taken aback by the constant bravery, the show of strength that these victims, that these survivors have shown. If I may, I've got a statement from one of them, who would first like to thank the Royal Gibraltar Police for their dedication in helping victims and bringing justice on their behalf. It goes on, I would also like to extend my gratitude to my family and friends for their unwavering support during these difficult times, as I've had to relive events spanning nearly 4 years, the course of the investigation and leading to the trial. My message to everyone is that it is never too late to come forward, seek help, and speak about your trauma. It takes immense courage to take that step, I know, as I felt ashamed, embarrassed, and trapped in my own prison. But I want everyone to know that there is always light at the end of the tunnel. Trust in the system and allow others to help you. Don't be afraid to speak to someone, no matter your age, no matter how long ago it happened, or even if it's recent. Justice will always prevail. One of my favourite sayings is, God will put you back together in front of those who broke you, and it's true. While 39 years cannot return my stolen childhood, I take solace in knowing I've stopped a monster from harming other children. Now I can finally breathe, start to be myself again, and live life comfortably with my partner and children, knowing he's no longer free to roam the streets.
Just so powerful. If you're just joining us, the words of one of the victims of Graham Southwell, who's been sentenced to 39 years in prison, and Iain, Triay, Clarence and Melanie, Chipolina, Guilliano have followed the case in the Supreme Court for GBC. So a strong sense then among the victims that justice has been served.
Of course, and it does not fix the damage that's been done. We included a number of quotes from the victim impact statements. Yesterday, we couldn't include them all, but for some of them, a 40-year-old whose daily life now includes, waking up screaming and having nightmares is just a normal occurrence when you're abused, when the trauma is inflicted on you at such a young age. It can have this long-lasting effect, but this is hopefully an opportunity for them to start to build, to start to move on. And I think it's our responsibility as broadcasters to amplify this message. And we're living recently, many people have seen the case of Gisèle Pellicot in France, who has waived her right to anonymity and turned the focus on the perpetrators. There is no shame in being a victim. There is no shame in having been abused, whether you're a man, woman, or especially a child. There's no shame there at all. And we need to, as a society, as broadcasters, and generally as a community, to shine that light on the perpetrators, on the attackers, on the abusers.
Yeah.
So the Commissioner of Police says that the 39-year sentence sends a clear message that the Royal Gibraltar Police will relentlessly pursue justice and prosecute those who sexually assault children whenever that abuse took place, and has appealed to anyone who has been a victim of sexual abuse, no matter how long ago, to contact the RGP by calling 200 72500 or by reporting it online at police.gi. And the fact that a crime was committed in the past, years ago, the police says is not a barrier to it being successfully prosecuted.
Yes.
Remind us, Melanie, what the offending period was for Graham Southwell.
It was from 1990 to 2015, if I'm not mistaken. So 25 years, and there's so much information, so you'd need a lot of time to, get into it. But when you look at all the evidence, because they were kind of suggesting in the court, like if they had got together to I don't know, go against Southwell. But when you listened to the evidence, there was actually like one of the victims was completely separate to the others because it was from the 1990s. So there was a big, like a 10-year gap in between. And there was another one who had realized he had been abused when talking to his psychologist. And this was before Southwell had been arrested. So there had not been that communication. So, I mean, hats off to these victims for coming forward. I mean, what they have done is extremely difficult. To relive the horrors that they must have gone through is, I can't even speak about it. It makes me really emotional to have listened, to have seen them. And I mentioned to Iain yesterday that one of the victims in particular who has been coming to court, when we saw him, I think it was back in October, he looked very frail and quiet. Yeah. But yesterday he looked like a completely different person, empowered and strong. And I think the impact statements really gave them a voice. And all of them said that they had a voice, which is something I think they felt they'd never had before until they came forward.
They had suffered alone. A lot of these had suffered alone. They hadn't spoken even to their partners, or eventually one of the victims said that they're, and again, survivors. We have this discussion. They are victims in law. They are victims of a perpetrator,
heinous
survivors.
Crime.
They are survivors now, and this is hopefully a threshold moment after which they can start to heal. But that they've carried this burden alone for so long, and again, to anyone who thinks that they have been through this, that they'd like to explore their options, there's no obligation. You can speak to the police and then decide that it's not something that you want to do, because going through the court system is extremely challenging, and I don't think we can sugarcoat that, because these the witnesses were put on the stand, had to go into excruciating detail about the abuse and be challenged, and it being told that they were lying. Yeah. They were told that they were liars in open court in front of a public gallery. Extremely difficult, but they persevered. Yeah,
and just on the sentence, I really like the way, which I assume this is the way they do it, but the fact that it represents all 5 of the victims. So 5 of the counts represents each one, which is great because each one wants to be given that he's going to prison for what they did to them.
Yeah. Some closure.
And yes, some of these took place before the updated Crimes Act in 2011. So some of them carried a lesser sentence, which now would have been a life sentence. Back then was 2 years. So one of them, which is the 2 years, it had to be under the Crimes Act before 2011.
So the sentence reflects the law as it was when the crime was committed.
Exactly.
One single, just as an example of what you said, one single count that was given a 2-year sentence ultimately, had that crime been committed after 2011, it would have been a possibility of a life sentence purely for that. So,
right, before we let you go, guys, the fact that Graham Southwell was in a position of authority, he was a volunteer at the St. John Ambulance Charity. What can we say about safeguarding and the importance of that? And
it highlights the fact that this is a critical issue. in Gibraltar, perhaps especially in a place like Gibraltar, where you might assume the best of people that you know and of people in these positions of authority. And it just, as I said, it outlines the importance of always rigidly applying them.
Yeah, and I think, although the places always have to make sure that people are vetted and that safeguarding policies are told, I think it's really important that children know. I don't think we focus that much on the children actually knowing what rights they have, and that, that behaviour is unacceptable, and they must have the power to come forward and the trust to be able to speak to someone who can then speak on their behalf and be their advocate.
Just thank you so much, Melanie, Chipolina, Guilliano and Iain, Triay, Clarence, for bringing us those details and reporting on such a horrendous case so sensitively, and for amplifying the voices of the victims of the crime, now survivors. And just a reminder that the Royal Gibraltar Police is asking anyone who has been a victim of sexual abuse to come forward, and you can contact the specialist team directly on 200 48042, or you can go to police.gi and report it there. If you are a young person, you can contact Childline on 8008 or Teen Line on 8009. But once again, Iain and Melanie, thank you for reporting on that case.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Graham Southwell, sentenced to 39 years in prison for repeatedly abusing 5 children over a period of 25 years.